who spent time in the AWA with Rheingans is our next inductee for the class of 2014, Mr. Brad Rheingans. A lot of this room knows a lot about professional wrestling, and as I grew up in the 80s watching it, I remember there was a guy by the name of the Iron Sheik who actually trained here with the Minnesota Storm, and he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame several years ago. And then during his speech, and remember, those of you that might follow the Iron Sheik on Twitter, I warn you, it's not safe for work. He goes out there and he mentions some names, and I'm watching this on YouTube, and he mentioned Alan Rice. He mentions Dan Chandler. He mentions Brad Rheingans. And of course he mentions Dan Gable, which for a Greco guy to mention Gable, I guess that's pretty cool too. But I just remember hearing Brad Rheingans' name, I'm like, wow, even the Iron Sheik goes back to the Minnesota Storm, or Minnesota Training Club. So he would be an interesting character to have up here. Alan, maybe he could MC next year? Not safe for work. Anyway, as we move on to our 2014 inductee, Brad Rheingans made 2 Greco-Roman Olympic teams and wrestled on 3 World Championships during his international career. The highlight of his career came in 1979, the World Championships, where he was a bronze medalist at 220 pounds. And this guy didn't have a love handle to be seen at all. This guy was cut. He was 4th at the Olympics in 1976 and was an NCAA Division II champion at 190 pounds for North Dakota State in 1975. During that time, the college division of Division II champions would move on to the NCAA Division I championship. And guess what? He was an All-American there too. Brad is unable to be with us tonight as he's recovering from knee surgery. So we'd like to direct your attention to the screen for a video of the acceptance speech by Mr. Brad Rheingans.
All of us were pretty tight, and we're all willing to help each other out with whatever it was. I think the greatest honors that anyone could achieve at the end of their athletic career, especially their Greco-Roman wrestling career. When I first got the newsletter a few months back, Alan Rice had mentioned that Jim Martinez, Jim Rashke, and Brad Rheingans were a part of a group of people that he considered pioneers of Greco-Roman wrestling. And I get these crazy thoughts once in a while, and the first thing I thought of is, when I heard pioneers, I thought all of us at the Minnesota Wrestling Club jumping in a stagecoach and taking off to the national AAUs with Alan and Gloria driving the stagecoach, and Jack and Dee Gauze riding shotgun. Just crazy, but we have definitely come a long ways from where we were back when I was competing, and but I think there's some things that are still true today that were true then, and that is, I was part of a fraternity of people that had the same goals in mind, but we were like a family. You know, when somebody had a problem, not necessarily a wrestling problem, but a personal problem, family problem, all of us were pretty tight, and we're all willing to help each other out with whatever it was. And I think that really made a difference. That bonding made a difference in our success. And I know, for me, that was one thing I noticed. That was a big difference I noticed from any other sport, that we had that fraternity, that strong fraternity. And when it always goes back to, there's always a genesis. And I was very lucky to have the timing and have, when I was done with my career at North Dakota State as a wrestler, Bucky Maughan was an excellent college coach. But the one thing he did that made a big difference in my wrestling career after college was he hired an assistant named Jim Dushin. And people that are involved with wrestling, most people are aware of who Jim is. He's wrestled for Iowa State. He was a Big 8 champ, All-American, and he's got a lot of international wrestling experience in both Greco-Roman and freestyle. Well, I considered myself a late bloomer, and Jim had this certain psychological bend where he could actually see in me, from working out with me and watching me wrestle, that I had the ability to go on after college and be successful in Greco-Roman wrestling. Now, I thought it was just poppycock at first, but he said, Brad, you gotta jump in your car and you gotta head to Minneapolis. You gotta head down to Berman Fieldhouse and you gotta talk to Alan Rice. And that's exactly what I did. And I didn't even know, I'd heard the name Alan Rice before. I'd never met him. Up to that point, I'd never met him. So I jumped in my car and headed down to Minneapolis. I found out what time the practices were at, and I walked into the Berman Fieldhouse downstairs where they were practicing. And there was this guy putting on a sweatsuit, and I thought, well, I'm gonna go over and ask him. So I go over and I asked this fella, I say, yeah, I'm looking for Alan Rice. And he responded and said, I'm Alan Rice. I said, oh, nice to meet you. And I told him that I was sent by Jim Dushin, and I wanted to, he felt I had the ability to be here and get involved with the Greco-Roman wrestling program. So, he introduced me to most of the guys in the room at that point, and then as you know, I started practicing with them formally then, and as time, a couple of weeks went by, and now Alan called me over one day and he said, Brad, I've talked it over with some of the guys here and the wrestlers, and they feel the same way I do. They think that you have what it takes to be up there with the top wrestlers. And I was actually a little surprised because I really hadn't learned that much yet. I didn't think. So anyway, he said, but I have to get you petitioned in because you have no track record. You haven't proven yourself in any national tournaments or any world teams or anything, so I'm gonna have to get you to write something to the National AAU committee, and they're gonna have to look at it and decide whether you'll be able to try out for the world team coming up at Golden Valley Lutheran College. And nobody had a piece of paper, nobody had a pen. We finally found a pen. Dan Chandler ran upstairs, grabbed a hand towel out of the bathroom, came down. So I wrote to the committee, Greco-Roman committee, that I would love to have a chance to try out. And this was all on a napkin, a paper towel from the bathroom. Alan Rice took it. The next day, or a couple days later, he came down to practice and said, Brad, you're in. Well, I was elated, I was happy, I was surprised. And at that point I thought, boy, I started gaining a respect for Alan Rice right then. I thought, here's a guy that's actually there for the wrestler. And so anyway, and I had heard that Alan had, over a period of years, had brought different international teams to America to train with the wrestlers. And I was looking at this as a chance to get over to Europe and train, because I knew we were going to be training before these World Championships in Poland if we made it on the team. Well, one of my teammates, Dan Chandler, showed me 3 moves, basically 3 different throws in 1 week. And the last practice we had, Dan just looked at me and said, "That's all you need." And anyway, make a long story shorter, I made the team. We went over to Poland. We trained in Poland for 3 weeks before the World Championships. I didn't have a real good World Championships because that was pretty fast, and I just wasn't a better wrestler yet. But I was just very fortunate to get in the spot that I got in, and I would have never got in that position if it wouldn't have been for Alan Rice and my teammates. You know, they were all right there behind me. I could feel it. It was that fraternal, that family feeling, you know, and everybody was for everybody, and there was no individual achievement award being sought after. Everybody was equal. Everybody wanted to help everybody. And so I think the dynamics of that family and fraternity are what's really important. And I think that was the genesis of my success in Greco-Roman wrestling. And wrestling is the best sport in the world. It's the toughest sport in the world. And it develops character beyond comprehension. And I can't thank the people in my life enough for what they have given me by encouragement, and all my coaches, just right here tonight, Alan and Gloria Rice, Greco-Roman Hall of Fame, and there's real meaning behind that award, and a lot of you out there do not really know the meaning behind it. Your intentions are good, but I've experienced it. I've seen what these people have done for so many wrestlers and so many people, including myself. And that's why I know this is a very special award, and I'm honored. I'm humbled by receiving this award. And I want to say to all of you out there in my fraternity, in my family, including Alan and Gloria, thank you so much. I wouldn't have gotten what I got if it would have been for all of you. Thank you.
As we said, Brad unavailable to be here. Present and accepting the award here on Brad's behalf is a past recipient of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame's Order of Merit, longtime friend of Brad, Mr. Mike Chapman.
Jim Raschke, where are you at? Do you realize that you and Brad now are in the Dan Gable Museum Hall of Fame in 2 places? You're both in the George Tragos Luthez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame, and you're both now in the Alan and Gloria Rice Greco-Roman Hall of Fame. Pretty unique honor. Kyle, great job with that video. Kyle went up and interviewed Brad and got the essence of Brad Rheingans. For those of you who know Brad, that was Brad. When Brad found out that he was getting this great honor, he called me up, and he was so excited. We talked for 2.5 hours on the phone, and he never once talked about himself. He said, "This is an opportunity for me to thank everybody. back home in Appleton, at North Dakota State, traveling all around the world, the friendships, that's all he talked about, was the friendships and the people who helped him and meant so much to him. That was the real Brad Rheingans. Not only is he one of the most powerful, greatest athletes I have ever known. I've been to 45 NCAA tournaments. I've known every American Olympic champion in person since World War II. That man is one of the greatest examples of what wrestling is all about. Incredibly powerful, very thoughtful. Sometimes he calls me up, we'll talk for 2 hours, and the word wrestling doesn't even come up. We talk about religion and history and life after death and important things like that. He's a remarkable human being. He gave me a list of about 450 people he wants me to thank, and I've whittled it down to 5. First and foremost, of course, is his mother, Lois. Brad lost his father when he was a young man, and then he lost his brother when his brother was only 24 years old. And his mother followed him all around the United States and all around the world. And what a great inspiration she was to him. He loves her dearly, and right now Lois is struggling with her own health problems. So Brad's dealing with that. He has one of the worst knee injuries in the history of humanity, maybe as bad as Jay Robinson, what he went through a couple years ago. And you know what Jay went through is absolutely remarkable. Brad's kneecap has split in 4 different places and going in different directions, and they don't know what to do. And they finally came up with a remedy, and he's going under the knife soon. He's had 26 major operations in his life, and this will be the toughest one he's ever faced. And here's another staggering fact about Brad Rheingans. When you go home tonight, get in your car, and I want you to count up to 89 real slow. 1, 2, 3, 4. Through his career as a professional wrestler and a booker for Japan, he flew to Japan 89 times in his life. And that's why he doesn't like to travel much anymore. 5 people he wanted to make sure that I said something about were his mother, Lois, who desperately wanted to be here tonight and simply couldn't. Marcia Nygaard, who he says is his lifelong soulmate. He says, whatever you do, don't introduce her because she'll be embarrassed. But I want her to wave. Marcia, will you wave? The great Jim Dushin, who's from my hometown of Waterloo, Iowa, which also happens to be the hometown of a fellow by the name of Dan Gable. And Jim Dushin and I have been friends since we were 12 years old. I was in his wedding, he was in mine. And so many times Brad has said, if it wasn't for Jim Dushin, I never would have wrestled Greco-Roman. He used to come in that room and throw me and Bob Backlund all over the room, and we learned so much from him. And the last week he was there, he sat me down and said, Brad, you can be a world champion, a world level wrestler. You can make the Olympic team in Greco-Roman. You've got it all. You've got it all. And that guided him, gave him the confidence to go ahead and try. And this didn't come out in the video, but Brad Rheingans won 7 national titles in Greco-Roman and never, ever lost to an American. 7 years, never lost to an American. And the last 2 people he wanted me to thank are Alan and Gloria Rice. He said, people don't know what Alan has done for the sport of wrestling. They think they know. He's done some financial things. He's done things like help different groups. He's done all these things. But if it wasn't for Alan Rice, there's no way I would have wrestled Greco. I can give you a list of other people that wouldn't have wrestled Greco. And he said, and Gloria, there were so many times that I would feel lonely or like I wasn't doing the right thing or going in the right direction. And she'd say, Brad, let's go talk. He said, Gloria Rice played such a huge role in my life. So he said to me, will you do one last thing when you're wrapping up? Will you ask that crowd to give a standing ovation to Alan and Gloria Rice? As for Brad, Alan.
Thank you, Mike, for your speech on Brad's behalf. Again, one more round of applause for our Class 2014 inductee, Brad Rheingans.